Hi, this is Risa and welcome back to my stitch along series. I'm going to show you how to stitch 4 gorgeous ribbon embroidery pendants. This is part 2 of a 2-part series where I'll focus on the delphinium and fuchsia pendant designs that were inspired by Niekerk's Ribbon Embroidery and Stumpwork book. There is a book review for this which you can watch by clicking on the link above. In this video, I am going to skip directly to the patterns page so I can show you how I've adjusted the design to fit the size of a small pendant. What I did was I photocopied this pattern design by reducing the size to about 86% in the printer, and I find that the size fits the flower pendant that I'm trying to work on, as you can see here with the fuchsia and the delphinium pendants. Once I was happy with the size of the pendant, I traced the pendant bezel outline on tracing paper and then used it to select the flowers that I would like to stitch in the pendant. So if you have this book, join me to stitch the delphinium and the fuchsia pendants. Next, I used pinking scissors here to prepare the edges of the cloth that I'm working on, and I'm using silk dupion. And I am tracing the pattern using a light pad and heat erasable pen here. Once you've finished tracing the pattern, you'll need some muslin to use as backing behind your main fabric, and then you're going to mount both of them in a frame. Here I'm using an 8-inch frame, and you need to pull the cloth taut against the frame. I'm going to start with the delphinium and Agapanthus flower design here, and I'll go through all of the materials I'm going to use. I'm going to use a 22 cyclamen pearl thread and a fern green thread. Then I'm going to use 4mm 132 variated green and some 89 and 66 glue variated 4mm ribbons for the delphiniums here, and 2 shades of green for the stems and leaves. So here I'm going to start with the stems with the twisted stitch here by just twisting the ribbon so that you have a nice tube, and I will start with the Agapanthus flowers here, and then I'm going to use the pearl green thread that I have for the stems of the delphinium, and I'm going to couch them in place. Next, I'm going to stitch French knots to stitch green buds here at the top of the delphiniums. Using the 4mm green variated silk ribbon, I'm going to stitch twisted stitch or twisted ribbon stitch here to form the leaves of the Agapanthus, and I will insert the needle at the tip of that leaf and then couch it where I would want the folds. So as you can see, once you do that, it sort of bends and you get a nice little folded look for the leaves. For the Agapanthus flower, I'm going to use the pearl thread that I have and stitch essentially straight stitches in a crisscross fashion like I'm doing here. So about 4 to 5 stitches should be sufficient, and you just go around the pattern, and in the center you stitch straight stitches with the green thread and then fly stitches to fill in the middle of the flower here. I love stitching the flowers of the delphinium. I do it a bit differently than Niekerk's instruction in the book. So I'm going to start with a 2mm silk ribbon to stitch French knots here. Just one loop around the needle should be fine. And then I'm going to stitch looped ribbon stitch, or a half bow stitch sometimes it's called. And that is essentially a really simple stitch, but gives it a really puffy, beautiful look to the flower. Essentially, you create a little bit of a loft here like that, and you stitch your needle in the center of the ribbon and then you pull through very carefully so the other side has a loop as well, so it kind of looks like a ribbon. Let me do that again. Here I'm using 4mm now, and what you do is you progressively make the loops bigger as you get to the bottom of the delphinium, so that you have a nice sort of 3D look for the flowers you can see here. The final touch is to stitch French knots in the center of that half bow stitch, so you get the center of these little florets for the delphinium, and it gives it a divine look, I must say. You can also stitch a few French knots outside as they will make it look more natural, like they have some buds that haven't opened. Now I'm going to use a lighter blue here, again starting with French knots and then progressively using the 4mm variated blue thread for the larger petals. That's done. Doesn't it look gorgeous? Now let's move on to the fuchsia pendant design here, and I'm going to go through the materials again. I'm using Niekerk's pink ribbons here, and I'm using a 7mm silk ribbon here, some DMC 370 green floss here for the leaves, some pink floss, and some number 24 embroidery wire for the stems. So I'm going to start with the Stumpwork leaves here, and I'm going to just outline the leaves with back stitch. And then fill satin stitches here above those back stitches. So you bring the needle out on the outside of the outline and then insert it in the central vein of the leaf. And I'm going to do the same for the other leaves as well. Now I'm going to cut out some of the wire for the stems, and I'm going to couch that wire with 2 strands of the 370 green DMC floss. So you can see I'm just couching it here, and then I'm going to stitch over the wire here really closely, and I'm going to bend this bit here over the second leaf. Using a number 18 chenille needle, I've pierced holes and I've inserted the wire here and bent it at the back so it gets arrested, and I'm going to stitch that wire onto the muslin fabric, and I'm going to do the same for the second flower. Cut out those wires at the end, and now I'm going to stitch a floating stem using Niekerk's instructions from the book. And essentially I'm just going to wrap around a metallic green thread here around the wire and insert that wire into the fabric once it's done. Maybe run a few more loops around that wire to cover it up, and then I'm going to stitch it to the fabric to arrest it in place, and I'm going to do the same with the second stem as well. For the fuchsia bud, I'm using a 7mm pink ribbon, and I'm going to stitch an inverted twisted chain stitch here As you can see, I am stitching it upside down if you're familiar with chain stitches, and I'm going to leave it a bit puffy and not pull too tight, and then stitch a straight stitch at the bottom here. For the larger flower, I'll start with a French knot with the 7mm magenta thread here, and I'm going to use that as a base to stitch ribbon stitches on top of it so that I get a nice puffy look. So as you can see, ribbon stitches you stitch by inserting the needle in the center or side of the ribbon, depending on which side you want the ribbon to fold. And then I'm going to use a 4mm silk ribbon here for the petals at the bottom of the fuchsia. I used 2 strands of thread to stitch the green stamens here, and I'm going to use Miyuki beads to stitch the tips of the stamens. Now I've finished all 4 of the pendants here. To see the stitch along for the tulip and the irises, you can click on the link above. What I'm focusing on here is finishing up for the fuchsia and the delphinium, and I'm going to show you how to attach it to the pendants. As you can see, I've been cutting out the muslin at the back, and I'll do the same with the front of the flower by leaving an allowance to fold over the bezel. To remove the lines, I will blow dry the pattern here so that the heat erasable pen sort of magically disappears. As you can see, they've gone, and now I am going to attach it to the bezel and the pendant here. You will need some E6000 transparent glue, some fray stop glue, some floss, some paper clips, and a piece of wood to be able to apply both the fray stop glue to the edges of your cloth if it is a cloth that frays easily, and then you use the sewing thread to stitch 2 millimeters off the edge of the fabric like so, which you can then pull together over the bezel. So, and then you adjust your design at the center and then pull the fabric tight across the bezel by stitching a few stab stitches like so. Now I'm applying the E6000 transparent glue, and I am going to place my pattern over it and attach it for 24 hours with these paper clips. So that's done. I've completed the delphinium pendant as well, and I'm going to attach the paper clip and leave the 2 pendants to set for 24 hours. I'm really pleased with how the delphinium and fuchsia pendants have come about. I hope you liked this video and that you have found it useful. Don't forget to click on the subscribe, like, and notification buttons. See you again next time. Bye bye.